Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to our video series. We're already in week number 6, and we're getting toward the end of this class, and we only have 8 total weeks of this class. We're well beyond the middle point. We're moving forward. Once again, we're back in the videos. We're back discussing some things. So, in week 1, we talked about the 8 parts of speech. In week 2, we talked about the writing process and how that all works together, right? In week 3, we talked about comma placements. Week 4, our middle point, we talked about run-on sentences and sentence fragments. Last week we had kind of an interesting thing where we talked about how to use quotations, and we really explored that through the sense of academic argument. This is something that we're really working with as we go along. One thing to think about academic argument as we move forward is that really everything is an argument, and we'll explain that a little more in one of the other lectures, but it's a good thing to remember. This week we're going to talk about time shifts and the way that the way we as we write, we look at time. Right? There's different tenses. We talk about things in the past, or we talk about things in the present. We talk about things that will happen. Right? We talk about all these things. But one of the problems that a lot of writers have, especially when they're getting started, is they switch back and forth and they don't keep their time consistent. Right? So in one sentence you're talking about the past, and then the next sentence you're talking about the present, and it gets really confusing. So we want to really work on keeping those time shifts together. So let's talk a little bit about how this works. Welcome to week 6 once again, and hopefully we get a lot done this week and we learn a lot. So obviously we're talking about time shifts. We've already kind of explained that. So one of my favorite novels, one of my favorite novels I've ever read, William Faulkner's novel, The Sound and the Fury. Right? It is arguably one of the greatest pieces of literature ever written. And although at the end of reading this book, readers are deeply moved and forever changed for the better, getting through this book is incredibly difficult. If you only read occasionally, or if you don't read at all, I don't necessarily suggest going out and grabbing this book. It is something that I believe everyone should experience because it's a great novel, but it's really tough. And let me talk about why it's tough. Right? Faulkner, being a fantastic writer, right? He tries to write like people think, right? And within this novel. And so he skips around between things that have happened, things that are happening, things that will happen, all without warning his readers about the time shifts. It's a really confusing novel because you're back and forth through time. You have no idea what's happening, when things are happening. You're all over the place. There's no sense of beginning, middle, end. It's just kind of all jumbled together. And while in literature that's a really interesting thing to do because you kind of experience everything all at once, you don't want to do that in your essays. You don't want to do that because that's a really interesting thing for someone like William Faulkner to do, but William Faulkner was not nice to his readers. He thought that his readers should work very hard to get through his ideas, and so not as bad as maybe someone like James Joyce, even though this is a literature class, but he did feel like people should work to get to the ideas. You don't want your people to work when you're sharing your ideas with them. You simply want to be as clear and concise as possible. So shifting through time is something you don't want to work, or that you don't want to do. So let's move on. Still talking about Faulkner. Faulkner is considered one of the greatest writers of all time. He's one of the greatest writers. But this is the trick he plays on his writing because he's making it exhausting and difficult to read. Of course, the payoff at the end is fantastic, but he's basing everything that he's written here on this huge payoff. If it weren't so great, every copy of that book would have been used in people's fires. People would just throw it in their fireplace, keep warm for the winter. It's the best use for that book. But it's considered a classic because he has such payoff. But don't put that kind of pressure on yourself when you do your writing. Don't try and have this huge payoff at the end. Just try and express your ideas. So this week, let's discuss how to avoid accidentally playing these tricks on our own readers, or obviously, or purposefully. We don't want to do that either. So these are time shifts. We're going to talk about past, present, and future tenses, right? So the English language, if you will, can be discussed using 3 versions of time, right? So the past, the present, and the future, right? So we're basically talking about what has been, what is, and what will be, as we kind of talked about a little bit earlier in this lecture. Mostly we focus on the first two states of time in the English language, past and present, right? So as far as in the way that we write, right? So mostly we say, for example, past, I spent the day running errands, right? Present, I spend my day running errands. I'm doing that currently, right? Or the future, I will spend the day running errands. That's what I'm going to do. Maybe you're sitting on a breakfast table and you're saying, oh, what are you going to do today? Well, I'll spend the day running errands, right? We don't typically talk about that in essays, so we're going to spend a little less time talking about future tense and mostly focus on that past and present tense. So note how the present and future tense primarily use the same verb construction. This is another reason why we'll focus more on the past and present tense. So let's talk about, let's go back and let's define the word tense. So tense is told through the verbs we use, right? And in fact, it's the only part of the sentence that changes as we toggle between sentences, right? If you go back to the first thing, if you looked, is I spent, I'm spending, right? I will spend. The only things that's changing in those entire constructions are the verbs, right? The verbs, the things that cause the action. When did the action happen? Happen past, present, or future. This is another big reason to understand what your verbs are and how to find those. So the problem we need to address with tense is maintaining consistency between them. We'll only confuse our readers, as Faulkner did, by switching back and forth. We don't want to confuse our readers. We want our ideas to land very wonderfully with people so they can the reason why we work on getting on improving our grammar, improving our usage, our sentence structure, and all these things is not so we can so people can go, oh, what a wonderful writer you are, I love your prose and all that other stuff. It's so people don't even have to think about your writing. They just simply get to experience your ideas, and then they're not really thinking about the way you're using words. They're simply ignoring the fact that you're even using words and instead just getting your ideas. And that's essentially the goal that you want, especially in academic writing. Now, if you move on and you find that you really love writing and you want to get into creative writing or those type of works, then there's a lot of other things that you'll need to consider. But for the purposes that we're talking about for this class, especially in the type of writing you'll do here at this college, most of it is not going to mean that you have that you're really expressing yourself in a creative way. I mean, there's some creation that goes with it, but mainly we're just trying to be clear. So let's move on to the next. All right, so considering the following passage. Once again, this is a passage that we made up to kind of explain this, so this isn't a real source. But let's consider this passage, right? Bella looked up at the water tower, wondering if there were an easier way. It should say an easier way. Sorry about that. In fact, I'm going to fix that as we're talking about it, because that's going to drive me a little bit crazy. Okay, so Bella looked up at the water tower, wondering if there were an easier way to make it to the top than climbing the rungs of the ladder step by step. She glances around at the local fishermen tending to their daily haul from the ocean. This is where she is, in the middle of a sea of workers, wondering what to do with herself and how the ladder means everything, right? A little bit heady, maybe a little bit more of a literary type of thing, and granted, this isn't necessarily the type of writing we'll do here, but it's a really interesting way of looking at how tense works. So we'll move on to our next one, to our next thing. Okay, so yeah, and here I have the and fix, the first thing I checked. Okay, so here we have, we're looking at kind of the problems of the passage. So we're going to isolate the verbs, and yeah, wow. Isn't it sad that I'm doing my revision as I'm explaining? But this is the reason why we revise, right? So going all the way back to the writing process, we need to revise. So let's isolate the verbs and then look again. So Bella looked. Bella, what did she do? She looked. She looked up at the water tower. She wondered if there were an easier way to make it to the top than to climb the rungs of the ladder step by step. She glances. All of a sudden, we're not in past tense anymore. Now we're in present tense. She glances around at the local fishermen tending to their daily haul from the ocean. This is where she is, both present tense verbs, right? We started in the past tense, now we're in present, in the middle of the sea of workers, wondering what to do with herself and how the latter means everything. The latter still means, right? So notice how the verbs looked, wondered, and were are in the past tense, and how the verbs Glances, is, and means are all in present tense. Notice how that works, right? Well, while maybe when you first read this, it looked fine, there are things that we need to do to make this consistent, right? To keep it to where if people are really reading what we're talking about, they can understand what kind of tense we're in, right? So let's go let's go on. So we have two ways of fixing this passage. Either choice is correct. There's really no right or wrong here, right? Provided that we're being consistent. So let's change them into the present tense. Let's change those verbs to make them work. Right, so here we go. Bella looks up at the water tower. She no longer looked. Now Bella looks up the water tower. She wonders if there is an easier way to make it to the top than to climb the rungs of the ladder step by step. She glances around at the local fishermen tending to their daily haul from the ocean. This is where she is, in the middle of a sea of workers, wondering what to do with herself and how the ladder means everything. See how that works? Now all of a sudden we're staying in present tense the whole way through. It's starting, we're getting a sense of how time is working within this. We're seeing that things are happening right now as we're reading, and it continues to happen right now, right? So that's how that works, right? So we go to the next. Let's switch this over to past tense. Let's look at a way to make this as something that has happened. And we are now telling the story from a future position, and we're talking about what happened, right? So here we go. Bella looked up at the water tower. She wondered if there were an easier way to make it to the top than to climb the rungs of the ladder step by step. Those all stayed the same from our original, right? So now she glanced around at the local fishermen tending to their daily haul from the ocean. This was where she was, in the middle of a sea of workers, wondering what to do with herself and how the ladder meant everything, right? So either one is good, and you, as a writer, you get to make that choice. You get to decide which is better. But in terms of grammar, in terms of the way that we're using the words, either version works. Either is correct. The choice of which tense you use is primarily up to you as the writer, provided that the writing is consistent. Okay, there are a couple of things that would determine that, you know, maybe in just some of those things as far as writing in the academic thing will determine what tense you use. So there's a couple of things. So let's do some clarifications here. So when writing in college, especially in the APA style, and you'll get used to that in your later classes. Hopefully APA is not so terrifying yet. It shouldn't ever be terrifying. It's really just a way to make your papers look. But there are kind of some rules around it. But anyway, we'll talk about that in a later class. But anyway, when writing in college, especially in the APA style, the majority of your work should be in past tense, unless you're writing in the narrative mode. You can write in the narrative mode in past tense as well, but as we'll show, if you're writing about a piece of literature or an argument, right? Those things, arguments or pieces of literature, pieces of those type of writings, we consider to be in present tense, right? We always consider, right? However, studies and research and those type of things that you're studying, we always consider those to be in past tense. We did a study, but we write, but this person writes this. A little confusing, but you'll get the hang of it as you move forward. So let's give an example. In a 7-year study of the effects of river pollution in China's Yangtze River, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, might not be, but anyway, in this river, Walters found past tense in the study, right? Walters found the waters to be dangerously close to becoming toxic. Here's where we're going to shift construction, and it kind of goes a little bit against what we've been talking about through this thing, because in the same paragraph, now we're switching tenses, because now we're talking about something that's being written. So this is where it gets a little confusing, but kind of bear with me. So he found the waters to be dangerously close to becoming toxic. In his findings, he claims, he's making this argument, right? He's made it in the past, but we're considering it current because we're using it now. So in his findings, he claims that government regulation and public awareness are the keys to solve. Okay, so the government regulation and public awareness are the keys to solving this issue. We changed construction in the middle of that. I'm so sorry that we did that, but I wanted you to kind of understand how academic writing will differ from regular writing. When you're dealing with these things, so we switch back and forth, but we're staying within those areas, right? We're still staying consistent. Notice how the past tense refers to the study, right? The present tense refers to his findings, right? But we're still keeping those separate. And to do this, you really need to be aware of what exactly you're writing about, and hopefully, and this is going to be something that it's going to take some time to learn, but you'll get it. You'll get all this stuff down. So understand that there are some clarifications to this, but the main thing is staying consistent. So as long as, even if you're switching constructions, and when you're doing this kind of work in academic work, even when you're switching those tenses within the same paragraph, right? Make sure you're keeping consistent as far as what you're talking about. Are you talking about a study or some research that has been done, right? And then are you talking about the writing that has been done in relation to that, right? So the writing that you've done in relation is going to be in present tense, or any kind of literature that you're writing about or argument you're writing about. But the study itself is in past tense, because that's something that has already happened. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Breathe a little bit. Okay, I'm going to take a little breath. Hopefully, if you do have any questions, and this can be a little confusing, so please ask questions. But if you do have any, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, as always, as we say at the end of every one of these videos, please let your instructor know. They can pass the information on to the people who designed this course, or your instructor can help you with some of these concepts and questions, and so on and so forth. Once again, I just want to reiterate that Bella story that we used in here is not an actual published work, so you don't have to go look for it if you thought the writing was fantastic, which you probably didn't. But if you did, you're not going to find it anywhere. It's just simply something we put together for this video series. So and then thank you to William Faulkner for letting us insult him so deeply. So have a great day, and we will see you next week. Enjoy. Thanks. Bye.